before we begin our case, would our judge like to tell us anything about their personal, about themselves and their judging experience and anything they want to see from this case?
Sure, I'll be brief. This is my first term as a judge in general, so still getting used to some of that. I'm also a technology professional, so it may have some relevance to the case.
Okay. All right. 6 minutes on the clock. If my judge and Savannah are ready. Every day, people are watching TV, driving to work, texting a friend, or sitting at home, typing out a debate case, and trying to make a funny intro. But people are going about their daily routines without realizing how much of our world benefits from technology. Not just everyday people, but scientists, engineers, doctors, and teachers are all using technology to better people's lives. If we take a proactionary approach to technology, we can further the value of the well-being of all humanity. Value of the well-being of all humanity. Well-being is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as the state of being comfortable, healthy, and or happy. When people don't value innovation, it stifles people's ability to create and benefit from products that add well-being to their lives. Because of these reasons, I am resolved that the proactionary principle ought to be valued above the precautionary principle. More on this later onward, to our main definitions. Now, I would like to define the difference between uncertainty and risk. According to K. Francis Park of the City University of Hong Kong, risk is the situation under which the decision outcomes and the probabilities of occurrences are known to the decision maker. And uncertainty is the situation under which such information is not available to the decision maker. In short, uncertainty is unknown danger and risk is known danger. The definition of the proactionary principle is as stated by its creator, Max Moore. People's freedom to innovate technology is highly valuable, even critical to humanity. This implies several imperatives when restrictive measures are proposed. Excessive risks and opportunities according to available science, not popular perception, account for both the cost of the restrictions themselves and those of opportunities foregone. Favor measures that are proportionate to the probability and magnitude of impacts, and protect people's freedom to experiment, innovate, and progress. This, in a nutshell, is the proactionary principle. Protects people's freedom to innovate and move forward with haste while accounting for past opportunities using calculated risk-taking. More on that later. The definition of the precautionary principle is as stated by the Oxford English Dictionary. The principle that the introduction of a new product or process whose ultimate effects are disputed or unknown should be resisted. As shown by these definitions, people's freedom to innovate technology is highly valuable, even critical to humanity. These definitions also show that according to the precautionary principle, any new technology or product whose ultimate effects are disputed or unknown should be resisted. This means that if you're inventing a new technology and it's unknown whether or not that innovation can cause a minor issue, it should be therefore resisted. Criteria: calculated advancement. Calculated advancement. Calculated advancement is identifying known risks and working to overcome them. Instead of trying to figure out every unknown problem of a technology or innovation, we should instead use calculated advancement to understand known risks and eliminate them if harmful. Now, I'm not saying that the precautionary principle is always incorrect. In fact, the precautionary principle is relevant in some cases, but it often vetoes very helpful innovations that have very little or no negative effects. Calculated advancements helps us proceed with rational caution based on understood risks. This allows us to progress faster and deliver products to enhance people's well-being. As we will see in my next two arguments, the precautionary principle stifles people's ability to innovate, while the proactionary principle uses calculated advancement to make logical decisions, not paranoid. Argument 1. The precautionary principle is not always the principle of keeping people safe. The precautionary principle is not always the principle of keeping people safe. While it does seem like the precautionary principle prevents harmful technologies by stopping them before they start, what in fact often does is prevent people from receiving life-changing advancements. The precautionary principle indiscriminately vetoes innovations that, if examined, aren't dangerous, preventing people from getting innovations that would uphold their well-being. For example, golden rice. Every year, 1.3 to 2.5 million deaths annually occur from vitamin A deficiencies. And if people don't die from the deficiency, they often go blind. Golden rice is a GMO. At the sound of the word GMO, people start to worry, but not all GMOs are dangerous. Golden rice is a genetically modified rice with the ability to have the seeds recollected after planting, and it's full of vitamin A. All of this is amazing, and the company to top it off is in planning to distribute it to farmers in developing countries for free, providing vitamin A where it's strictly needed, and saving millions of lives. But it's still not being distributed. Why? According to Ed Regis, the author of Golden Rice, The Imperiled Birth of a GMO Superfood, had golden rice not faced overly restrictive regulatory conditions, it would have been cultivated by rice farmers and distributed throughout some of the poorest regions of South and Southeast Asia. It would have already saved millions of lives and prevented millions of children from going blind. We take this kind of guilty until proven innocent approach to technology, and then we experience this unnecessary delay in bringing beneficial technologies to the needy. Argument 2. The proactionary principle uses calculated risk-taking. Argument 2. The proactionary principle uses calculated risk-taking. While the precautionary principle worries about and steers clear of any type of uncertainty, the proactionary principle understands the risks and takes action to mitigate them. When space organizations like NASA or SpaceX or Blue Origin create a spacecraft, they indeed assess risks before launching the spacecraft. For example, when creating a spacecraft, we rationally know there's a large risk the engine could explode, so we test and plan accordingly. We minimize the risk to a point where the risks are small, but the precautionary principle would test for uncertainty, wasting time and resources testing for things that may never happen. Regulating for uncertainty is fearful. We can never know every potentially possible harmful outcome. Furthermore, let's not forget that innovators are incentivized to self-regulate. Companies do practice calculated advancement by conducting their own tests and experiments to make sure their products are safe. Thank you for your time. I will now stand for cross-examination.
Thank you. I trust that you're doing well today. I just had a few quick questions. So first, is there harmful innovation?
Innovation can be harmful sometimes.
How can the proactionary principle protect us from this harmful innovation?
The proactionary principle will protect us from this harmful innovation by using calculated risk-taking and sometimes not even developing that innovation. See, innovations that are harmful most innovations that are harmful are intended to be harmful. If we create weaponry, those are intended to harm people. And that's not really a situation where either approach would prevent that from being harmful. There are certain situations where getting out a new technology, and the technology might have dramatic influences damaging people. I think if that's what you mean, the proactionary principle would make sure to take the time necessary, not an overly restrictive amount of time, to make sure a necessary amount of testing is to be done to be considered safe, but not an overly restrictive amount.
Thank you. Who gets to decide whether something is safe, the innovator or the governing body that ensures safety?
Both, but mostly the innovator.
Could a greed convince an innovator to cut corners and create unsafe innovation?
It could, but in fact, innovators are actually incentivized to self-regulate because if you send out a product, and I hope we can agree that most innovations are small-time innovations that are meant for product, which are products. If they send out a product and it proves to be unsafe, it will be recalled, and they will therefore not make money on it, and their brand name will be tarnished.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, what is the purpose of innovation?
Innovation's purpose is to progress humanity, and I believe to help develop the economy through minor innovations that are sold as products.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have today.
Thank you.
So my opponent and judge ready? This is 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Savannah Belche, and I'll be the negative in this debate. U.S. former President Calvin Coolidge once said, quote, "Nothing is of greater importance than the conservation of human life," end quote. This quote shows how the precautionary principle can be used to conserve life. The very purpose of the precautionary principle is to do just that, save lives. It is for this reason that I stand against the resolution. In the context of innovation, the proactionary principle ought not to be valued above the precautionary principle. In the conflict between the proactionary principle and the precautionary principle, where innovation is concerned, the value of life must be valued above all other values. It is more superior because of the value hierarchy. In government founding documents such as the Declaration of Independence, a hierarchy of values is listed. The following probably sounds familiar. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, but among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End quote. There can be no pursuit of happiness without first the liberty to pursue it. There can be no liberty where there is no life. Life is the most foundational of all human rights. All other rights rest upon it, for those values would be meaningless to someone who do not first have life. Adding on to this, John Locke stated that, quote, "All mankind being equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions." Contention 1, precaution saves lives. Contention 1, precaution saves lives. A good example of how the precautionary principle can successfully save lives is in the story of England and vaping. The precautionary principle introduced standards in the new innovation of e-cigarettes that kept the British people safe. When first introduced in England, the innovation was highly regulated, which set industry standards, including the rigorous testing of ingredients. In the US, by contrast, there were lots of efforts to ban them completely by industries that would be hurt by the competition of e-cigarettes. And so the industry was not regulated at all, and sure enough, people in the US began to die, almost all of which were the result of buying unauthorized vaping products not containing nicotine but THC oil. Strict regulation of products through the precautionary principle can ensure their safety, therefore saving lives. Contention 2, proaction costs life. Contention 2, proaction costs life. In the midst of World War I, the wonders of a new radioactive substance called radium were discovered. Radium is a nuclear material that is self-luminescent and caused by the decay of uranium. Because of its light-in-the-dark properties, people began making paint with it and brushing it onto watches, mainly for the sale of soldiers in World War I so that they could still be able to tell the time on the battlefield. This was done in factories filled with female workers. After being told the paint was harmless, these workers ingested deadly amounts of radium on a day-to-day basis. In order to not waste paint, they were instructed to point their brushes on their lips to keep them sharp, or even to put the brush with radioactive radium in their mouth. Because these girls did not know the truth about the substance, they would paint their faces, teeth, and nails for fun with the deadly paint. This would soon lead to shocking and painful results. Many of these women began suffering from bone fractures and anemia in their jaws, now known as radium jaw. The deadly paint was now cutting away at their bones. In 1923, the first factory worker died, and before she passed away, her jaw fell away from her skull. 1 year later, and 50 women were now ill, with a dozen dead. In this situation, the precautionary principle was wrongly placed above the precautionary, which cost us life. The fundamental value of life is not being valued in this innovation, and we can see the consequences of this today. Contention 3, regulations protect life. Contention 3, regulations protect life. Microplastics are extremely small pieces of plastic, usually smaller than 5 millimeters, but despite being so tiny, they hurt life in our environment. There are two types of microplastics, primary and secondary. Primary microplastics are purposefully added to products, such as cosmetic products, to enhance specific characteristics of the product. Secondary microplastics are pieces of plastic broken down from larger plastics, such as packaging supplies. Microplastics, especially ones of the secondary type, make up a lot of the environmental problem. Not only is this hurting the environment, but this is also hurting people. Through drinking water and consumption of seafood, microplastics end up in humans. The large quantity of microplastics, as well as its long degradation time, make it a very unpredictable situation. The consequences and risks are unknown, so the European Commission is currently using regulations to learn more about these microplastics and protect life through the REACH regulation. Through the example of microplastics, we see the precautionary principle protecting life. The regulations being put in place are keeping people safe, and the value of life is rightfully being upheld. The purpose of innovation is to better the public, and in these examples, I have shown to you how precaution does just that. Thank you, and I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Okay. Put in the clock if our judge and Savannah are ready. Okay. Can we agree that innovation is important?
Yes.
can we agree that the proactionary principle better upholds faster innovation?
Yes, but well, maybe faster, we still need the precautionary principle.
Is a rational amount of speed necessary in some situations, such as my earlier golden rice example?
Can you please expound on that question?
Sure. So, can speed be necessary in certain situations? And an example of this would be my golden rice, where by getting it out, we would be saving people from vitamin A deficiency.
Yes.
Okay. Does the proactionary principle use previously gained information to make rational decisions?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay. Are most innovations small, everyday product innovations?
I think there's an equal number of both big innovation and small innovation.
Okay. When it was introduced, were there known risks to radiation? Or just general uncertainty, sorry.
To radiation in general?
When it was introduced, you had examples of the radium girls.
There were a few known risks, but with the substance that was in my example, nobody knew those risks. They just thought it was some magical substance.
Okay. Should innovators self-regulate?
Please define self-regulation.
Okay, make sure beforehand that their products are safe and when put out will not be recalled for being unsafe or ineffective.
Yes.
Are innovators more incentivized to regulate their products than the government?
I don't really know what that question means.
So, do innovators have more incentivization to make sure their product is safe and isn't recalled than the government to make sure that product is safe?
Yes, but the government should set rules in place for the innovators so that they follow the rules and come up with and create and innovate new technologies that are
Okay.
safe for the public.
Does the government understand who understands the innovation better, the innovator or the government?
The innovator, but the government is the one who understands the value of life.
Do innovators not understand the value of life?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, that's all the questions I have time for. Thank you. Alright. Starting affirmative prep time, 3 minutes on the clock, if my opponent and judge are ready. Let's begin. Now, in this first rebuttal, I'm going to be rebutting a few points my opponent made, bringing up some points of my own. The first point I would like to bring up is safety versus speed. Now, my opponent is basically arguing for safety and the human life and how we can protect and how we can uphold human life using safety and the precautionary principle. I would like to point out that safety is sometimes extensive safety is sometimes deprecating to human life. I would like to go back to my earlier example of golden rice. Golden rice has been in testing for 22 years. And as I pointed out earlier, about 2 million people die a year from vitamin A deficiency. And over that course of time, about 40 million lives probably could have been saved by the release of this free, reusable rice into those countries. Those people had a right to life, but there must have been some dangerous problem with golden rice that the precautionary principle found it necessary to test for 22 years and pretty much essentially pay 20 million lives to make sure that it was safe, and it would have to have been a large issue that they found or are still trying to find, that is worth those 20 million lives. I would like to rebut a point my opponent made. my opponent brought up a few examples of when the precautionary principle should have been used. Some of those were, one of those was the Radium Girls, and this was a terrible incident, and nobody is debating the fact that this was terrible. But I would like to explain how this was not an example of the proactionary principle. See, there was, as my opponent agreed in Cross-Ex, there was very little known risks, just general uncertainties about it. We didn't understand it fully, and because of that, the proactionary principle would not actually have advanced. The proactionary principle evaluates innovations and finds the risks, and then takes risks based on necessary. I would also like to point out that her example was kind of a 20 out of 20 hindsight. We see it clearly now, but back then no one could have seen those issues, even if we would have put it through lots and lots of testing. In fact, nuclear reactors are still being used, so the radiation was necessary. Of course the Radium Girls and other examples of when it was misused were terrible, but it is not necessarily a bad invention. I would like to bring up another point. It is bring safety to market. If we want to value human life and safety, innovation and faster innovation and not hampering creative innovators can help that. I would like to bring up an example. It is a product that I recently found called the Choker. It is it looks kind of like a nail gun that's all rounded edges, and the point is when your kid swallows something and they start choking, you put it over their mouth and pull the trigger, and then it sucks the thing that was choking them out. And if we this saves the kids, this could save the kids' life. It could uphold their value of human life. And it is not a dangerous innovation, as in it needs a minor amount of testing to be considered safe. But again, the precautionary principle would put it through all the unnecessary testing to make sure that this product, which didn't need that testing, was safe, when a proactionary approach would get it to market and benefit the people who need this product. That's all the time I have. Thank you for listening to my first rebuttal.
Taking 3 minutes of negative time. Is my opponent in judgment?
Yes.
Right.
6 minutes. I would like to begin my negative rebuttal by refuting a few things that my opponent brought up. So first, my opponent's value is the well-being of all humanity. However, following his definition of well-being, how can a person be comfortable, happy, or healthy if they first don't have life? If we are not alive, we cannot have well-being. Secondly, in their argument 1, they gave the example of golden rice as an example of why we should value proaction over precaution. However, we must remember that not all scenarios and situations are golden rice. For example, in my contention 3 with the microplastics, the European Commission is upholding the value of life within innovation and regulating it so that we can make sure that it is fully safe before we use that. And third, my opponent in their last speech did not agree with my example of Radium Girls in contention 2 as an example of, I think it was proactionary principle being in play. This, however, is an example of the proactionary principle in play because we did not test the radium substance, we did not set any regulations, and because of that we can see horrible things that happened. Now I will get into a summary of my case and voting issues. In my first contention, I showed how not regulating the vaping industry in the U.S. led to a black market for the product that made them unsafe. The very purpose of the precautionary principle is to ensure the safety of products for the well-being of customers. In my second contention, I gave an example of when using the proactionary principle and valuing that above the precautionary principle led to the violation of human life. Life is a foundational human right, and choosing to place precaution over proaction has proven itself to better secure life. Lastly, in my third and final contention, I showed how regulations protect life. Regulations give innovators time to research and face troubles before they face us, and before they damage life. Giving the example of microplastics, the European Union sets a good example of mandates and regulations that help us better our lives. I will now get into voting issues. Voting issue 1, value hierarchy. Voting issue 1, value hierarchy. As I've stated before, the Declaration of Independence lists a value hierarchy: life, then liberty, and then property. It is essential to have life before you can have liberty or property, or anything else for that matter. Those two do not exist if you do not have life. We can apply this to our debate. There is no well-being of society without first life. Voting issue 2, point of innovation. Voting issue 2, point of innovation. The purpose of innovation is to better the public. It goes against the very purpose of innovation to cause harm. I ask a question: how can you benefit the public if the public is dead? There are risks inside of innovation that we need to protect ourselves from, and the precautionary principle does just that: protects people and protects life. Now that I have proven my value of life as more superior to my opponents, Judge, I now encourage you to cast a negative ballot. Thank you, and thank you so much for taking your time and judging today.
Alright, resuming affirmative correction, 2 minutes on the clock. Starting now. Alright, minute is up now. Starting proaction, affirmative second rebuttal, 3 minutes on the clock. If my judge and Savannah are ready,
Ready?
let's begin. In this case, I'm going to be refuting a few points and making up my some points of my own, all under my 3 voting issues. My first voting issue, and under which I will be using my refutations, you can label this as V1. My first voting issue is safety versus speed. My opponent pointed out that I only brought up one situation where speed would be valuable than safety. I agree, this was actually a mistake on my part, but I do have 2 other examples of when speed is safe. And my first example is necessary medicines. If a necessary medicine is required, if we need a necessary medicine to get out to people, it is withholding their value of their well-being and their life to get out that necessary medicine fast enough for them to be able to utilize it. If they die from the sickness before the medicine can get out, then it therefore has failed its purpose for them. Now, my second example is nuclear fusion. Now, nuclear fusion is what a bunch of scientists are striving for. It is the opposite of nuclear explosions and nuclear reactors, which take apart atoms to create energy. It fuses atoms together, and it does the exact same thing, produces an almost equal amount of energy, but it is safe. If I were to invent nuclear fusion in my backyard, that would not be safe. It would not be safe, but what would people do? It would save so many lives and give clean power to the world, saving the environment from many nasty chemicals. Now, I'd like to bring up my second voting issue, which is small innovations and the economy. My opponent has not addressed my examples, did not address my examples of small innovations and bringing safety to market. These are most innovations, just everyday innovations. I actually have some experience with this. My dad is a small-time inventor. He has made a few products that are not harmful. They're just magnetic shoelace closers and a type of butter dish. These are still innovations, and they do not deserve the scrutiny of the precautionary principle. My dad took a proactionary approach when inventing these. And my third voting issue is there must be a clash. There must be a clash. One side cannot always be applicable, the other side cannot always be applicable. You must vote based on which side is most applicable in most situations. Now, and that's all the time I have. Thank you very much for taking the time to judge our debate. I hope you will cast an affirmative ballot.